and persistence. We engage our community the way we engage our clients, with honesty and humility and the dogged determination that we can do better. Chad's Design Build, remodeling done well with love.
DevilRadioswag.com. You've asked for it for over a decade. We've finally gotten off our dead and responded. DevilRadioswag.com. T-shirt in Dom's favorite slimming black, white, or gray. DevilRadioswag.com. Crew necks, hoodies, coffee mugs, exclusive merchandise of the greatest radio show ever. Only at the DevilRadioswag.com, because we got bills too.
Jane Matnair and Greg Bach.
Coming up on the show, we'll do some recombobulating with Dan Schaefer from the recombobulation area, and all things entertainment with Matt Miller. Make sure you join us.
Matt Nair on air, weekday mornings at 11. The Devil's Advocates radio show is broadcast under a time brokerage agreement between Devil Radio and Civic Media, Inc. Some portions of this program may be pre-recorded. Warning, you are about to listen to the greatest radio show ever. And due to contractual obligations and to shield our airwaves and corporate licensees from any semblance of liability, responsibility, and gullibility, we must tell you the views represented on this show are not necessarily those of this station or its management. This radio show contains differing points of view on current political topics, and due to the nature of its contents, it should be heard by everyone. Thank you for listening. Now live from the Civic Media Studios in Madison, Wisconsin, where the political party is just beginning, welcome to the Devil's Advocates radio show. Friends proving it's never personal, only politics.
Please allow me to introduce myself.
And now, here's your hosts, Dom and Crute.
Welcome to the Devil's Advocates radio show. Dominic, a Thursday show for the ages.
Happy Friday Eve, Crute. Rich working hard on the board. Thank you, sir. Of course, our fair audience. Welcome. Welcome to it.
Dom, this might be one of our most litigious shows ever. James Santel, fine former U.S. attorney, joins us in the 5 o'clock happy hour. We'll get to Jim soon. Better stick around. But let's start with the case that Trump wanted to be at today. Trump had a lot of cases today. First and foremost, he was defend on Trump, David Pecker back on the stand in the New York hush money trial, and some damning testimony against the old man. But while that's going on, the U.S. Supreme Court, where he really wanted to be to, perhaps try to persuade a few of his appointments on the bench. But, Dom, I devoted hours. I mean, this took hours. I thought, maybe an hour for each side. Dude, it was multiple hour testimony. And as Gorsuch described it, they were writing a rule for the ages. We'll see.
We will see. I did catch some of it, Crute, and it seemed to me the conservative justices on the Supreme Court didn't really want to address this particular case. They were more concerned about the ages.
It was starting to piss me off, actually. Every time someone would try to bring specificity to the actual case before them, Alito, especially Samuel Alito, kept, Mike, gave a very Ron Johnson-like stall tactic. He would effectively shut down the speaker. But anyways, the Washington Post, they've got coverage, Dom. The Chief Justice hated Trump's appeals, court decision, and other takeaways. I thought it was a very sound appeals court decision. I'm just a layman. Again, that's why we've got former U.S. Attorney James Santel joining us after 5. But here is how Devlin Barrett and Ann Marimau reported for the Washington Post. The Supreme Court spent hours Thursday morning debating former President Donald Trump's claim of immunity from prosecution for allegedly conspired to undo the results of the 2020 election. And the ruling, which could come in June, doesn't have to be June, could be sooner.
It could be.
But it'll probably come at the end of June, seeing how these justices work, Dom. Could do far more than chart the course of Trump's case. It may forever alter the boundaries of presidential power. We're writing a rule for the ages, Justice Neil Gorsuch said, the least quotable of all the justices, except for perhaps for Clarence. Now, Clarence Thomas, should he have recused? I'm just saying, when your wife's an insurrectionist.
She was part of it, right? I mean, Arizona, also breaking news from yesterday, decided to indict a bunch of the fraudulent electors in the state of Arizona. She was on there emailing those folks, hey, you got to overturn the election. That's the justice's wife was involved in that.
It was very encouraging to see Mark Meadows get indicted. I've been waiting for that guy to get indicted on serious charges. Well, here are the takeaways from the U.S. Supreme Court. The question, does Trump have absolute immunity? And, I mean, you really got to be ballsy to get up there like his attorney did and basically make the claim everything. He would be immune from everything. And they brought back the argument. I didn't think the U.S. Supreme Court was going to consider the argument about, well, you know, of course, if you impeach the president, then and only then he would be susceptible to criminal prosecution, which seemingly shoots a hole in your whole claim of total immunity. I mean, how can both be true? So anyways, back to the coverage here. Now, the justices seem to generally agree in broad terms that Trump does not have blanket immunity. I was encouraged, and we've got some sound from Amy Coney Barrett. I think this, one of the more succinct back and forths, this the attorney for Trump, I believe, and she gets him to make a series of concessions. And the question is, even if the president, any president, would have immunity for, let's call it official acts, what about what he's alleged to have done by the special counsel Jack Smith? Let's go case in point down the list. Which ones are private acts and which ones are presidential acts? And see if you notice the distinction. Amy Coney Barrett, yeah, I was even surprised she took this line of questioning. Play it for the people, Rich.
So you concede that private acts don't get immunity?
We do.
Okay. So in the special counsel's brief on pages 46 and 47, he urges us, even if we were to decide or assume that there was some sort of immunity for official acts, that there were sufficient private acts in the indictment for the case to go back and the trial to begin immediately. And I want to know if you agree or disagree about the characterization of these acts as private. Petitioner turned to a private attorney, was willing to spread knowingly false claims of election fraud to spearhead his challenges to the election results. Private?
As alleged. I mean, we dispute the allegation, but
Of course.
Sounds private to me.
Sounds private. Petitioner conspired with another private attorney who caused the filing in court of a verification signed by petitioner that contained false allegations to support a challenge.
That
Private.
also sounds private.
3 private actors, 2 attorneys, including those mentioned above, and a political consultant helped implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding, and petitioner and a co-conspirator attorney directed that effort.
You read it quickly. I believe that's
Yeah.
private. I don't want to.
So those acts you would not dispute. Those were private, and you wouldn't raise a claim that they were official.
As characterized, what we would say, Your Honor, if I may, what we would say is official is things like meeting with the Department of Justice to deliberate about who's going to be the acting Attorney General of the United States.
Sure.
Communicating with the American public, communicating with Congress about matters of enormous
Thank you.
concern.
Thank you.
That's pretty damning.
I mean,
she
that's kind of the
laid
point,
out-
right?
She laid out the points raised by the special prosecutor that even if he did, or any president had some sort of limited presidential immunity, not for private acts.
It would not apply to those very specific cases she pointed out and which she lifted from the prosecutor's filing.
But interestingly, when he actually made his oral arguments, he basically claimed these were everything that Trump did were official acts. And there were justices that tried to burrow down and say, well, come on, man. You know, you can't imply that this is not the act of a candidate. I mean, hell, they enumerated the false elector scheme. When a Supreme Court justice is reading back your client's scheme to overturn the election, and you're like, official act, a fake elector scheme, according to Trump's claims, that's an official act and therefore should have presidential immunity in all cases, case closed, and even in cases where let's say there's a bribe, where I think the question is, let's say someone wants to be an ambassador and they're willing to pay you $1 million. Well, the president can make you an ambassador. That's the official act. Well, predicated on that, effectively, that gives you blanket immunity each and every time. You could be corrupt. The intent could be corrupt. You could accept some sort of bribe. But because
but of course that's asinine, though. I mean, the act of
I'm not saying
assigning
it's not asinine.
the
I'm saying
assigning of the ambassadorship is an official act, sure. But if someone pays you personally $1 million that you stick into your pocket, that's a personal thing.
But if it's immunity, understand motive doesn't matter. If you're immune from everything related to an official act, as Trump's team was trying to plead, then motive doesn't matter because you're already immune. You can't commit a crime. And, I got to tell you, Dom, I got the initial impression that this wasn't going to be a close case, that Trump's just going to get shot down. But I found Alito very troubling, and I believe we've got some sound of this. Rich, going to need your help. Here's Alito, and these conservatives, as the Washington Post observed, conservative justices seem far more focused on future presidents than Trump's future.
Yeah,
They
right.
kept casting this as a hypothetical. Well, won't there be retribution in the future? I think Kavanaugh asked. Won't we see a whole series of things happen? He also made the conclusion today, and I about jumped out of my chair and threw a shoe at the TV. Kavanaugh said, Jerry Ford's pardon of Nixon, in retrospect, almost everyone agrees was a great decision.
Yeah, terrible. That's why we're in the situation we are right now.
Well, while there's still time, let's play the sound. This is Alito pissing Crute off.
If an incumbent who loses a very close, hotly contested election knows that a real possibility after leaving office is not that the president is going to be able to go off into a peaceful retirement, but that the president may be criminally prosecuted by a bitter political opponent, will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy?
No. And Kavanaugh's series of examples were Reagan, Iran-Contra, and then it was H.W. Bush, who actually was up to his eyeballs in Iran-Contra. I mean, there were a number of pardons issued. And let's not forget, who was the attorney general at the time covering up those crimes? Why, it was Bill Barr. And then he threw in Clinton for good measure. See, it's tit for tat. It's retribution. And this is what will happen if we don't extend some sort of theoretical immunity.
So his position, being that if there were to be some prosecution for law breaking while in office, that the person in office would do whatever they could to not leave office, like what happened with Trump.
Well, they didn't clarify that point.
Well, also, they don't want to talk about that. This is for the ages. We're talking about the future. We got a guy literally right now. The reason you're taking this case up, because that's what this guy did. You don't even need to talk about hypotheticals. Just look at the case in front of you.
Come back. A show for the ages. Thursday edition, 844-96-PARTY.
Hey, Darcy, I just saw the perfect house. Can you help me write an offer on it?
I'd be happy to, Brian. Did you see it at an open house?
No, I just called a sign and had the agent show it to me. I didn't want to bug you.
Right. How many times have you heard me say don't call the sign?
All of them.
You called the agent working for the seller, and once you see the property with that agent, I'm no longer free to write an offer on it.
So
you need to hire us from the beginning, help you find the right home, negotiate on your behalf, and protect your interests all the way through the process, and it shouldn't cost you a dime.
Solidarity Realty. They're real, they're solid, and they're honest. Find them at solidarityrealty.com.
Hey, Dom, how many palindromes can you name in 30 seconds?
Race car, mom, dad, reefer, kayak, level. Did I say mom already?
You're forgetting one really important one.
Zero res.
Not only is it the coolest palindrome ever, it's also our favorite.
Right, I remember. Why is that again?
They advertise with us.
Zero res, my favorite palindrome.
And carpet cleaner. Get the best carpet cleaning ever. Schedule your carpet cleaning online at ZeroResMedicine.com. Tell them the Devil's Advocate sent you.
You know Ignite Glass and Gifts 3 locations in Madison, but you can also shop IgniteGlassandGifts.com. You'll find grinders, lighters, collectibles, hand-blown glass water pipes, artistically designed jewelry, and plenty of other items delivered straight to your door or to family and friends. Madison's favorite for glass, gifts, and vape. Ignite Glass and Gifts. Monona Drive, Williamson Street, and Odana Road. Plus IgniteGlassandGifts.com.
Every business faces challenges, but complicated, expensive, and uncertain shipping shouldn't be one of them. With USPS Ground Advantage from the United States Postal Service, you can avoid all the noise. No more unexpected surcharges, hidden fees, or complex rate structures. It's just easy, cost-effective, and dependable shipping. Tune your business's frequency to success and turn shipping to your advantage. Learn how at USPS.com/advantage. USPS Ground Advantage. Simple, affordable, reliable.
Occupy didn't start on Wall Street. It started on our street, the Devil's Advocates.
And we are back from the 420 break. Thank you for listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show. And historic show for the ages, Crute, 844-967-2789.
It is difficult that we top ourselves each and every day.
Every single day.
Strive for excellence. And we usually get there. I hope you agree. 844-967-2789. Callers, be patient. A few thoughts. I'm sharing this from Twitter. This is not a Crute original, but here were Trump's basic arguments today at the U.S. Supreme Court seeking immunity. POTUS, President of the United States, can't be prosecuted for official acts. Immunity is absolute. That's what they claim. Now, as I did play the sound of Coney Barrett, one of the conservative justices, basically differentiating between official acts and what is alleged that Donald Trump did by the special counsel Jack Smith, which his own counsel admitted were private acts, not the acts of a president acting as the president.
No, private act acting as a candidate for office in a campaign.
Sure. Not the president, doesn't have immunity, not for those specific actions. So case closed, right? No.
Yep.
They went on for hours from there. Here's more. Again, this is the Trump argument. The POTUS can be prosecuted for official acts if they're convicted and removed first, which, of course, begs the question, what about the absolute immunity you were arguing 5 minutes ago?
Convicted of what? If you have absolute immunity, you couldn't possibly be convicted of anything. It's very circular.
Dom, to be prosecuted, the criminal statute has to specifically say it applies to the president.
Really? I don't buy that either.
Claiming.
No.
Just two more here. In any prosecution, you can't introduce evidence that would constitute an official act. So if you're prosecuting bribery, again, we use the example of the ambassador paying $1 million for this ambassadorship. So if you're prosecuting bribery, you can't show that they did anything official in return for the money, which is an element of the offense. Well, of course, you can't also look at motive, according to Trump's team. Because you would have immunity, motive doesn't matter. And one more, Dom. Even though you can't prosecute a former president for unlawful official acts, anyone who does his bidding could be prosecuted. That was acknowledged by Trump's counsel. Everybody else, they're screwed. Oh, sure, they can be prosecuted. So anybody else can be, but not Trump. He is above the law. And a little bit more from the Post here. Takeaway number 4, the liberal justices say Trump's immunity claims would create a lawless king. Seems like we're trying to escape that once upon a time, Dom. Now, the 3 liberal justices also focus much of their attention on the future implications of an immunity ruling. But they worried most that granting Trump protection in this case would subvert the very premise of the founding of the United States to escape the tyranny of kings. I mean, I know Memories are short, Tom. The framers did not put an immunity clause into the Constitution. They knew how to, said Justice Elena Kagan. They were reacting against a monarch who claimed to be above the law. Wasn't the whole point that the president was not supposed to be above the law? Now, the Sauer guy, John Sauer, the Trump lawyer, said the Constitution was designed to build checks on the presidency and did not describe a format for criminal prosecution of a president. Either take him out with the old impeachment or nothing ever happens to the president, apparently, according to Sauer, according to Trump, above the law. And while the conservatives fretted the ruling against Trump would create a permanently hobbled presidency, based on a bunch of hypotheticals, they kept bantering Kavanaugh and Alito between each other. Well, it'd get really bad. We should know we participated in some of the bad up until now when we were young lawyers. The liberals fretted that giving him significant immunity would encourage a new kind of criminal presidency without consequence. Seems like he already had one of those. Pardon me. Let me just pull it down. That was the takeaways, according to the Washington Post.
844-967-2789. Conservative Judge Michael Ludig wrote. We have some comments from him. We'll get to the phones first, though. Callers have been patient. We appreciate it. 844-967-2789. Mark, you're up. Welcome. What do you got for us?
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, well, I'll point out again, as I've pointed out in the past, Hamilton refers to it in Federalist 69, that the president is elected for 4 years, officer of the United States for 4 years, and be amenable to personal punishment and disgrace. I mean, as he's clearly saying out there, they did not, and he goes on to describe what a king is, of course, not amenable to punishment, but he is, because he's the king. I mean, supposedly, but even kings are subject to the law, as proved in the case of Charles II. And of course, even before that, Henry II, who said, "Won't somebody get rid of this troublesome priest?" And his knights went and murdered Thomas Becket. And so Henry II got whipped by the Canterbury monks. I mean, that the law has to mean something. I mean, that Donald Trump took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Now, if these nitwit
my fingers crossed.
If these nitwit conservatives want to give the president immunity, then Joe Biden could actually say it's my official act as upholding my oath to defend and protect, the Constitution of the United States, is to take Donald Trump out and just have him hung, or to have the Supreme Court, who he says, I perceive that the Supreme Court is attacking the Constitution of the United States, and take them out as well. I mean, how far do they want to go here?
Well, the lawyers for Trump would argue those are official acts and he would be immune from prosecution.
Which, of course, is the most asinine position you could ever possibly take in a democracy, a representative republic, ever. Because that would cease to be a democracy. At the very moment you accept that premise, you are no longer a democracy.
My greatest concern, these Republicans are looking for a reason to write a convoluted ruling. And the convoluted ruling will extend some sort of limited immunity to the current and future presidents for official acts. You can't be prosecuted if you're acting on the advice of the Attorney General of the United States. Although they did question, what if the Attorney General is corrupt? And it was interesting it would come from a Republican. I'm thinking, well,
Jeffrey Clark,
right?
And Jeffrey Clark, let's not forget.
Well, the official acts, according to Trump's legal team, would be the impanelment of a Jeffrey Clark. The unofficial acts would be pretty much every other part of the coup. Think the false electors, etc. Come back with us. More of your phone calls. 844-967-2789. A show for the ages.
Find the complete Civic Media lineup at civicmedia.us or the Civic Media app.
Civic Media News. I'm Terry Bell. Here's what Wisconsin needs to know. Wisconsin election officials are considering how far election observers need to stand from poll workers on Election Day this year. Wisconsin Elections Commission met yesterday to get public feedback on a proposal to make observers stand 3 to 8 feet from election workers. Commissioners will meet again in late June. High school athletic directors in Wisconsin say they need more time and more information before they can support student athletes getting the same kind of name, image, and likeness rights as in college.
Let's make sure we're fully vetted before implementing change. Let's make sure we do this and understand what the consequences are before we make a change.
Jeremy Schlitz of Madison is one of the majority who voted against NIL at Wednesday's meeting of the WIAA. I'm Terry Bell, Civic Media News. Now, here's what you need to know closer to home. This is news from WMDX Madison. The UW-Madison blames miscommunication and a technology error for the confusion that led to a polling place at the Memorial Union being shut down for a time on primary election day. Some voters were turned away for about 90 minutes on April 2nd. The city clerk ultimately got a Dane County judge to extend voting hours in Wards 60 and 134. Officials at the university and the city agree it was a unique situation that they don't expect to happen again. Selling alcohol at the Kohl Center means big money for the University of Wisconsin Athletic Department. This was the first year the UW offered alcohol in the seating bowl, and sales at basketball and hockey games added up to more than $1.3 million. That's according to UW Athletic Department records obtained through an open records request. Associate Athletic Director Justin Doherty tells the State Journal it's something fans wanted. That's what you need to know. This is WMDX News.
I'm Pete with the 60-second Showbiz Beat. The late Sam Kinison was known for outlandish behavior and pushing boundaries on stage and off. A new book about the show Married with Children reveals that Kinison actually auditioned for the part of Al Bundy. According to the book, during a season 4 guest starring role, Kinison mooned the entire cast and crew, then apologized by taking everyone out to dinner at an expensive LA restaurant. Later in the week, to make up for the fact that he was late to the set, he hired strippers to serve lunch. Kinison also apparently flashed a gun at one of the show's producers who showed up at Kinnison's house, suspecting his girlfriend, who is also a friend of Kinnison's, was there. In addition to Kinnison's antics, the book also talks about how the series regulars were all hesitant to be cast on Fox TV's first show. The book is called Married with Children versus the World, the inside story of the shock-com that launched Fox and changed TV comedy forever. Don't worry, the book is a faster read than its title. For more showbiz fun, tune in to Nightlight with me, Pete Schwaba, weeknights from 7 to 9 p.m. on the Civic Media Radio Network.
A high-pressure system continues to sit overhead today, keeping us happy under sunny skies and highs soaring to 60 degrees. Winds begin to get a little feisty tonight as showers and thunderstorms strike us tomorrow. I'm meteorologist Brittany Merlot. Right now, it's 59 degrees.
At Chad's Design Build, we provide remodeling done well with love. Our commitments extend beyond our workplace and your home to support our community. We judge people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin, and we believe all humans deserve quality, publicly funded education, childcare, and health care. But what do you believe in? At Chad's Design Build, we believe every person must have the opportunity to thrive. If you're thinking about remodeling your home, go to chadsdesignbuild.com to learn more about our commitments to you, your home, and our community.
DevilRadioswag.com. You've asked for it for over a decade. We've finally gotten off our dead and responded. DevilRadioswag.com. T-shirt and Dom's favorite Slimming Black, white or gray. DevilRadioswag.com. Crew necks, hoodies, coffee mugs, exclusive merchandise of the greatest radio show ever. Only at the DevilRadioswag.com, because we got bills too.
Pete Schwaba.
On my next show, I welcome brewery owner and classically trained singer Kirk Bangstad and singer Brentley Brem, and host of Civic Media's Max Inc., Terry Barr.
Save the $2 on tomorrow's paper. Listen to the Devil's Advocates today.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. This one could be a show for the ages, folks. At least a very litigious edition. Donald Trump, oral arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's put that one on the shelf because we got a fine guest coming to help us digest former U.S. Attorney James Santel coming at 5:05 because, Dom, there's also the whole trial happening in New York, the hush money trial, and we've got new testimony today. And some of it was very damning to defend on Trump. I want to start from the body of the Washington Post. David Pecker, the unfortunately named Pecker, new payment to Playboy model violated election laws. And what I never knew until reading over the last couple of days, Dom, Arnold Schwarzenegger, before he ran for governor back in like 2003 in California, approached the National Enquirer and made an agreement with David Pecker to do a catch and kill. And unfortunately, there was some story that leaked out. And apparently, Arnold had a habit of apparently, let's just say, sexually harassing people around him. He was giving sort of a ceremonial role as editor-in-chief of some fitness magazines that Pecker was the publisher of. And they killed some stories on behalf of Schwarzenegger. But it also basically made it a point where David Pecker was well aware of what the consequences could be. So, setting the tone, Pecker knew the payments to the Playboy model violated election laws. Pecker testified that during the 2016 election, after discussions with Trump and his attorney at the time, Michael Cohen, Trump spent $150,000 to squash a story from Karen McDougal, a Playboy model who alleges she had an affair with Trump while he was married. Pecker said on the stand today that he was aware that hush money payments intended to influence an election in coordination with a campaign violated election laws. He also said Trump's team never reimbursed him for the payment. He got stiffed.
He got stiffed.
Isn't that typical, Dom? The hush money to McDougal is not part of the criminal allegations against Trump, but prosecutors seem to be using this testimony to show the jury that Pecker and Trump's team falsified business records to hide the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, Dom, the adult film actress whose payments are at the center of the New York trial because they knew those transactions violated election laws. David Pecker also, apparently, Dom, gave testimony that he was aware because of the prior circumstance with Schwarzenegger and was concerned that this could be construed as a campaign contribution in excess of federal campaign laws. He was well aware of what the campaign laws were, and he knew they were trying to break them. Now, Pecker received immunity from state prosecutors in 2019. It's been widely reported that Pecker received immunity from federal prosecutors when he provided information on withholding negative stories about Trump during the 2016 campaign. And federal prosecutors did not pursue charges against Trump. SD New York, what happened? Oh, yeah, Bill Barr was your boss. I recall. They killed it. But Pecker, catch and kill at the DOJ.
Yeah, literally,
People
right?
wonder why this is being prosecuted now. Ask Bill Barr why. But Pecker testified that he also got an immunity agreement from the New York State prosecutors, agreeing to meet with them and speak truthfully about his meetings with Trump and Cohen, as well as any transactions the company had with McDougal and Daniels. Pecker also agreed to testify before the state grand jury. The immunity agreement meant the state could not prosecute him for violating campaign finance laws. And Dom, they had a long friendship, kind of like you and I.
Crute, has been widely reported that Pecker received I'm sorry, you got this one. Let me jump down here. Trump's relationship with Pecker predated the election. Under questioning from Trump's attorney, Beauvais, is that how I pronounce it? Pecker said he had been working with Trump since 1998. That's a year before he became publisher of the National Enquirer. He said he alerted Trump when he learned of a negative story the tabloid was working on about Trump's second wife, Marla Maples. Pecker unsuccessfully tried to kill the story. In the early 2000s, Trump provided him with content about the TV show The Apprentice. In turn, Pecker would provide information to Trump about potentially negative stories. Beauvais' questioning seemed aimed at bolstering the idea that Pecker and Trump have had the same mutually beneficial relationships since before the 2016 election. That helps suggest that their intent with the payment to Daniels was not about the campaign or circumventing election laws, as prosecutor alleged. Pecker said during the cross-examination he did not consider Cohen, Trump's lawyer with whom he was communicating, a part of the presidential campaign. Mulvey also tried to undermine Pecker's credibility by pointing out that he flubbed the date of a key meeting that Pecker had at Trump Tower. What I'm getting at is that these things happened a long time ago, and that even when you're doing your best, it's hard to remember exactly what happened when, Trump's defense attorney said.
My understanding is that Pecker specifically testified when being questioned by the prosecutor that he knew that these were campaign activities.
Yes.
And that these were efforts to support the campaign. Above and beyond that, they went out and they put out stories. I mean, do you remember the story about Ted Cruz?
Yeah, Ted Cruz's old man was, hanging out with
apparently linked to the murder of JFK, and they put it on the front page, and Trump went to a podium.
Trump referenced it.
And Trump said, hey, did you see my opponent? Ted Cruz, his old man, apparently murdered JFK.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
True,
Yeah.
but it's on the front page of the National Enquirer.
And this is something I think when we start talking all this legalese and we get kind of in the weeds and we kind of, you got to put it in the context. Let's step back a little bit and let's think about who we're talking about here. We're talking about Donald Trump, right? The guy who claims that everyone's fake news media, the enemy of the people. I mean, this guy, not only was the National Enquirer and David Pecker doing catch and kills and playing defense for Donald Trump, they were playing offense, man. They were literally putting out fake stories, fraudulent stories about political opponents of the president. I mean, so when the candidate then president, obviously it worked out. He won. They were making an effort. They were purposefully defaming people on the front page of their newspaper. At the same time, they're playing defense for Donald Trump. So when you hear someone like Donald Trump talk about all the fake news media, well, he's a part of it, man. He was very specific with it, and Pecker was involved offensively, defensively. We cannot just brush past that when this guy goes out there and criticizes, everyone in the press and you're the enemy of the people, all these kinds of things. Well, you know what? He knows from what he speaks that he's been involved in it from day one. Hypocritical bastards.
Dominic, the Associated Press reporting, as Donald Trump was running for president in 2016, his old friend at the National Enquirer was scooping up potentially damaging stories about the candidate and paying out tens of thousands of dollars to keep them from the public eye. But when it came down to the steamy claims by porn performer Stormy Daniels, David Pecker said he put his foot down. Did you know this, Tom? I'm not paying for this story, he told jurors Thursday at the
That's because he wasn't paid. He wasn't reimbursed for the last story, the McDougal story.
Recounting his version of the conversation with Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, about the catch and kill scheme that prosecutors alleged amounted to interference in the race. Pecker was already $180,000 in the hole on other Trump-related stories by the time Daniels came along. I didn't want to be involved in this from the beginning. Well, who does? No one really wants to be part of a hush money cover-up scheme, do they? Pecker's testimony was a critical building block for the prosecutor's theory that their partnership was a way to illegally influence the 2016 presidential election. And the Manhattan District Attorney is seeking to elevate the gravity of the history-making first trial of a former American president and the first of 4 criminal cases against Trump to reach a jury. Yeah, I'm excited about that part, Dom, because it gives us something to talk about here on the Show of Ages.
Come on.
But the hush money trial was just one of the consequential legal matters facing the Republican presidential candidate on Thursday. We talked about the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, we don't need to go deeper in this, but there was also some action on the hush money side, Dom, or pardon me, the gag order. They did have a hearing on the gag order in the New York trial before David Pecker went back on the stand today. Now, I still don't know that Judge Merchan has given a clear ruling.
I don't believe he has nailed anything down yet, but my understanding, there was additional 4 incidences that the judge will
In the
take
last
under
3 days.
consideration. So I was
Yes.
wrong yesterday. It wasn't a baker's dozen. It could be up to 14 times that the former president has violated the terms of his gag order.
Dom, we do have some sound from the former president. We'd hate to miss out. We've got that sound, right? Rich, let's hear what Trump had to say well, I think this was during the midday break, actually, from the New York hush money trial, the voter deception trial. Rich played the first one from Trump.
As you probably have heard, some very big things have happened, but the biggest seems to be that the GDP just announces all the way down to 1.6%, and it's heading south. It's going to get worse. Gas prices in California were just also announced at $7.60. Gasoline is going way up. Energy costs are going way up. And the stock market is, in a sense, crashing. The numbers are very bad. This is Bidenomics. It's catching up with him. It's lucky that it's catching up before he leaves office as opposed to after he leaves office.
I mean, I don't know.
You know, the guy's got oral arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court. He's at criminal trial in New York. And look at him, always concerned about the American economy.
Isn't he, though? The markets were down. The Dow specifically down less than 8% today. And yeah, GDP, annualized at 1.6%. Now, that's not great, certainly. But perhaps the Fed's efforts to cool the economy are starting to take hold. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
I think we've got one more from Trump. Very important stuff. Tell him, Rich.
But this is Bidenomics. It's destroying our country at the border, destroying our country with other countries. They no longer respect the United States. I think the dollar's in tremendous trouble in terms of currency. This is going to be the standard.
Dollar in terms of beer?
With me, with Biden, you're going to lose. The dollar is the standard. That'll be like losing the biggest war we've ever lost. And it's a shame, but it's all the way down to 1.6. And I'll tell you, nobody thought that would be possible. And it looks like it's heading down from there.
1.6% growth is not a recession or a depression. It's certainly been worse than steady 1.6% growth. But here's the newsworthy part. He didn't break the gag order once today, speaking to the cameras outside the courtroom.
Well,
Maybe
not
he's
yet.
learning.
No, he's not learning. He's not learning. He just, his mind was elsewhere at the moment. Give him time. He'll get there again.
What he perceived as bad news for Biden was good news for him. So
Yep.
It took his attention. What I used to call that shiny objectism.
Yes.
Like you jump from one shiny object to the next. It's very much like the Trump campaign and trying to follow the way this man's mind works. I don't think it's so much, like master criminal. It's just sort of like disorganized fraudster.
Yeah. Well, when all you do is crime, then you're kind of a master criminal. I mean, if that's all you do all the time and the fraud, come on. The fact we've been having these conversations, I mean, of course, someone like Donald Trump would push our limits of the democracy. Electing a guy like that, who would possibly? And here you talk about, and James Santel, our friend, will come on at the top of the hour. But we talk, you hear these hypotheticals from the Republicans or the conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, the chances of that ever happening are very rare. Even the attorneys for Trump. Well, really? Someone organizing a coup is rare? I don't think it. Maybe it used to be, but that's literally why you're in front of the Supreme Court right now.
I thought it was Bidenomics. Come back with us. Phone lines open. The hush money trial. The oral arguments. Presidential immunity. A show for the ages. 844-967-2789. Commercial real estate leases. In Madison, I highly recommend Jeff Jansen from Altus Commercial Real Estate. Jeff guided me to my first radio station location on the west side. He helped us move to University Ave, and eventually Jeff set up the lease on the Civic Media World headquarters. No one works harder to provide options in commercial leasing. Call Jeff Jansen and his team at Altus Commercial Real Estate at 608-338-1101.
College may not be the right path for your kid, but that doesn't mean they can't earn a good living and have a secure future. If they like working with their hands and want to help build up surrounding communities, they should consider a career in the skilled trades through a 4-year apprenticeship as a union carpenter. To learn more, it's easy. Visit northcountrycarpenter.org and fill out the interest form to get more information. That's northcountrycarpenter.org.
Partner now with the greatest radio show ever and start getting return on your investment immediately. The Devil's Advocates are a small business just like you, and like you, we can't afford advertising that offers no return. The Devil's Advocates listeners support our sponsors and the mission. Tell you when your messages are working and put cash in your register. So invest your ad dollars to reach our raving Madison and Dane County fans, or affordably reach the whole state, Chicago, Minneapolis, and our nationwide stream audience today. The Devil's Advocates can be the voice of your business, hold special events at your location, interview your staff for satisfied customers to lift your business. Contact us today, Crute at darnwy.com. That's Crute at darnwy.com.
Looking for a roundup of today's important headlines in quick podcast form? Search no more. Find it now on the WMDX website at mad.radio. Your news just for the Madison area. I'm Terry Bell with WMDX News.
You're listening to the radio show your mother warned you about, The Devil's Advocates.
Yeah, thank you for listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show. Phone lines are open. Join us now, 844-967-2789. Stick around. Our pal James Santel, former U.S. attorney, going to join us at the top of the hour.
One other legal issue that popped up immediately after we left the airwaves yesterday, Dom, didn't seem quite fair. Arizona, the attorney general, laying out 18 indictments, 18 different Republicans indicted. A little of the coverage from the Arizona Central, Dom. A grand jury has charged 11 Arizona Republicans and 7 top aides to Donald Trump in a scheme to keep Trump in the White House by falsely certifying he won the state in 2020, though voters in the Grand Canyon state narrowly favored Joe Biden. Now, Attorney General Chris Mays, a Democrat, announced on Wednesday the grand jury had issued a 9-count indictment. It alleges the state Republicans, sometimes known as fake electors, and the Trump aides engaged in a conspiracy aimed at preventing the lawful transfer of the presidency of the United States, keeping President Donald J. Trump in office against the will of Arizona voters. Are you listening, Josh Call? What about Wisconsin voters?
What about Wisconsin? That's a great question.
And depriving Arizona voters of their right to vote and have their votes counted. The names of the 7 Trump allies were redacted from the 58-page indictment, meaning they have not been served notice of the charges against them. But Dom, though their names are redacted, we're going to name some names, as are the specific charges against them. Details in the indictment make clear that the architects of Trump's national campaign to steal the election are also facing charges in Arizona. The individuals we can name today on the air, Dom, include Trump lawyers, Rudy Giuliani. That guy's having a tough year so far. Feel bad for him.
Not really.
John Eastman.
Yeah, there you go.
Former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. I'd like to see the pressure turned up on him. Lawyers, Jenna Ellis. She had to sit through next to Rudy.
Flatulent Rudy, yeah.
During his testimony. Oh, she suffered enough, I think. Dom, your girl, Christina Bobb.
Back in the action. Yes.
Didn't she fund Gableman and Branchin from the state of Wisconsin, the corrupted former Supreme Court justice?
They did. Her nonprofit, I believe, funded the trip for Wisconsin state legislator, notorious Janelle Branchin, election denier, to go check out the cyber ninjas, man.
All the stuff was happening in Maricopa County. Dom, again, the Trump lawyers, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, lawyers Jenna Ellis and Christina Bobb, and former Trump advisors Michael Roman. Now, he's the one that got a lot of the Fani Willis stuff to happen because he was also indicted in Georgia. And Boris Epstein, isn't he a righty-whitey talk radio host as well?
Oh, I don't know.
Might
Is
be
he?
limiting.
I mean, there's so many of them.
I've often heard him peddling, stuff on the right-wing talk radio airwaves. I'm not clear I've ever heard him on a specific show, but Trump, who is asking voters to return him to the White House this year, is unindicted co-conspirator number 1, according to the indictment. Now,
why is Donald Trump unindicted? If he's a co-conspirator, why is he unindicted?
Well, there was some question about presidential immunity happening before the U.S. Supreme Court earlier today. I have seen other theories. We'll see if Jim Santel has any, but try to wrap up the coverage here from the Arizona Central newspaper. The Arizonans now facing charges include powerful and influential GOP figures, a former Republican Party of Arizona chair, a Republican National Committeeman, and an executive at Turning Point USA and its political arm, and 2 sitting state senators, one of whom retains immense political power at the Arizona Capitol. And the grand jury's decision could levy criminal consequences for an unprecedented plot to subvert the will of Arizona voters, one that has ruptured faith in the elections and fueled conspiracies that have taken root in GOP politics in the state. It comes as Mays, again, she's the Democratic Attorney General, has promised to aggressively combat election conspiracies, offering a sharp contrast to her predecessor.
Yeah. The
Mays,
Republican Attorney General from Arizona, they declined.
Mays reflected the gravity of the case in a 5-minute video statement. I'm going to quote her briefly, Dom. Whatever their reasoning was, the plot to violate the law must be answered for. And I was elected to uphold the law of this state. The scheme, had it succeeded, would have deprived Arizona voters their right to have their votes counted for their chosen president. It effectively would have made their right to vote meaningless. And the grand jury, panel of Arizonans who met in secret grand jury, Dom, they met in recent weeks, heard evidence presented by Mays prosecutors, and ultimately decided there was enough to substantiate criminal charges. The 11 electors, Dom, just in case we've got friends listening in Arizona, we like to name names. Tyler Bowler, an executive with the Turning Point USA and committeeman for the Republican National Committee. Nancy Cottle with the C, who chaired the Arizona Trump electors. State Senator Jake Hoffman, State Senator Anthony Kern, Jim Lehman, former U.S. Senate candidate, Robert Montgomery, former chair of the Cochise County Republican Party, Samuel Moorhead, a former leader of the Gila County Republican Party, Lorraine Pellegrino, the secretary of the Arizona Trump electors, John Staffson, a former executive director of the Arizona Republican Party, Kelly Ward. She's drawn some notoriety.
Ward
She is
and her husband.
Former chair of the Arizona Republican Party, and Michael Ward, her husband, and a GOP activist. Those are the indictees that weren't directly on the Trump legal team, Dom.
I mean, it seems like the same kind of thing happened here in the great state of Wisconsin. I wonder what Attorney General Josh Kaul thinks about all this.
Well, Trump is probably unindicted co-conspirator number 1 here as well. Number 1 in your hearts, Devil's Advocates, and James Santel, fine former U.S. attorney. He joins us next. Please stick around.
Madison's home for the Todd Albaugh Show.
Todd Albaugh.
Hey, everybody, stop by on a TGIF edition. That's thank goodness it's Friday. Our old friend Peter Rapine from eFarms World stops by with a week in review. Wacky things humans do.
The Todd Albaugh Show, weekdays noon till 2.
As a network, we're called Civic Media because a big part of it is we want to start modeling how civic discourse really should happen and being respectful of each other's opinions, even if you disagree. Like they should be given a platform.
If Rocker and I can get along, we can all get along. I know,
exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
Rocker? Yeah, that's right, Jimmy.
Well, you do have a wall in between the two of you, so
glass.
it's like
It's only glass. Tear down the walls. Listen to Max Inc. Saturday night, 6 to midnight, across the Civic Media Radio Network.
This is your local Civic Media radio station. Want to hear even more? Anytime. time? Find all of it at civicmedia.us. You're listening to Mad Radio, WMDX 1580 AM Columbus, W224EG Madison, and always streaming on the Civic Media app.
ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. Court adjourned for the day in the hush money trial case of Donald Trump. He was back in court in New York while the Supreme Court heard arguments in the federal election interference case and whether Trump should have presidential immunity from criminal prosecution. Trump's top advisors also now facing new allegations in Michigan and Arizona, centered on efforts to overturn the 2020 election in those states. ABC's Aaron Katersky has more.
The former president, as an unindicted co-conspirator, isn't going to face any charges here, but the indictment in Arizona says that he was part of this scheme to keep him in office, even though Joe Biden won Arizona in 2020.
In California, USC officials canceling the main graduation ceremony due to recent pro-Palestinian protests, where demonstrators have clashed with police. It's among dozens of campuses dealing with protests over the Israel-Hamas war. And jobless claims fell to the lowest level in 9 weeks. 5,000 fewer Americans filed for first-time claims compared to last week. This is ABC News.
Hey there, James. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Rich. How are you today?
All right, we're all hooked up. There you are.
Good.
Fantastic.
Great. Sound is all right from my end here?
Yeah, you're all right.
Terrific. Good. Good.
Anything musically you want to hear to end your segment?
Let's see. Let's do, can we do some Kenny Loggins?
Okay. Any particular tune?
Let's see. So I guess,
how about Heart to Heart, if I can find
that's great. All that
right.
good stuff. That's great. And Heart to Heart, Conviction of the Heart's a good one more recently, and all kinds of good things. I'll leave it to your good discretion, Rich. That sounds
I
great.
will look for Heart to Heart. I'm gonna turn your mic off, and we'll be back at 5:06.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rich.
Sounds good. All right.
The Devil's Advocates Radio Show is broadcast under a time brokerage agreement between Devil Radio and Civic Media, Inc. Some portions of this program may be pre-recorded. Warning, you are about to listen to the greatest radio show ever. And due to contractual obligations and to shield our airwaves and corporate licensees from any semblance of liability, responsibility, and gullibility, we must tell you the views represented on this show are not necessarily those of this station or its management. This radio show contains differing points of view on current political topics, and due to the nature of its contents, it should be heard by everyone. Thank you for listening. Now live from the Civic Media Studios in Madison, Wisconsin, where the political party is just beginning, welcome to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. Friends proving it's never personal, only politics.
Please allow me to introduce myself.
And now, here's your hosts, Dom and Crute.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show, a Thursday show for the ages, a happier happy hour. And Dom, I promise this might be our most litigious show ever. We got a fine former U.S. attorney and a friend of ours. He is James Santel. He is the host of the Amicus, a law review, Saturday mornings on the Civic Media Network, 9 to 11. Tune him in for all the coverage. But, Jim, we appreciate you making time for us today. I woke up happy this morning, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Because you like litigation, isn't that right, Mike?
I knew it would be a target-rich environment for conversation on the radio airwaves with you, and I appreciate you joining us. Jim, let's start with the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes.
The question of presidential immunity, and I thought it was going well for democracy, small d democracy. I thought, the question was sort of being put aside. Hell, even Amy Coney Barrett sort of went through the official acts and the private acts that a president could undertake and got concession from his lawyer, Sauer. Basically, that damn near every one of the things enumerated by Jack Smith as crimes would fall under the header of private actions. So why isn't the case closed? See you in court, Mr. Trump?
The answer is it should be closed, and this should have been resolved months ago, as we have talked on this wonderful broadcast. The Supreme Court today obviously addressing this issue by the former president that he has blanket immunity for anything and everything that he does inside and outside the ambit of his official duties, his private duties. It's all covered. That's his position. And of course, that's ridiculous. That's an absurd proposition. It is not consistent with our Constitution, and it's not consistent with anything that courts have said in the past. All of this goes to this larger issue of whether or not we're going to hold a president responsible for his criminal acts, whether we have kings, whether we have kings in America or we have presidents in America. That's what the lower courts have found. Judge Chutkan found that. The Court of Appeals found that. And this case should have, frankly, been resolved a long, long time ago. It appears, consistent with your observations, Mike, Supreme Court is not going to grant blanket immunity here. But I am troubled. I am troubled by the fact that they're seemingly parsing out this notion of private acts, public acts, official acts, and especially when you focus upon the allegations, as Michael Dreeben did. He is representing the Solicitor General in this matter. Focusing on these particular charges, they are crimes. They are crimes. And for that reason, this distinction that the Supreme Court seems to be heading in the direction of, at least the majority, of dividing somehow this indictment up, that's very troubling. That's very troubling. A crime for these purposes is a crime. And even if you are inside some official capacity, you cannot violate the law. And that's the point.
And Jim, it was very strange. Every time the lawyer for the DOJ tried to bring the conversation to the specifics of the trial before the bench, Alito kept waving, I want to talk about hypotheticals. We're trying to, I think Gorsuch said, we're trying to write a decision for the ages. And I'm like, this is the same court that completely sets aside stare decisis and prior precedent. But anyways, your thoughts, counsel.
Right. And if we're writing for the ages, then we can make a very simple point, which once again is presidents are not immune for criminal acts that they engage in while they're in the White House. And candidly, they're not immune from other things outside of the White House as well. That can be the fundamental, very simple notion. To your good observation, once again, my initial thought about what was going on today was, well, the Supreme Court scheduled this on. They need to attach some academic legitimacy to this. They need to heighten somehow this truly, truly frivolous, unsubstantiated claim, bootstrap it into something that sounds better. So we're going to pose all of these hypotheticals about the next case, about other things that are out there, all these other things that frankly do not go to this particular prosecution, and along the way send the unimportant frankly important message, but unimportant position that somehow we're talking about something about which reasonable people can differ. We are not. Anybody turning into that exchange today would think, well, gee, reasonable people could differ on this. The answer is no, they cannot. And all of this I would offer, from Alito and Kavanaugh and to others to some extent, is all window dressing to make this, again, this argument that has no close, if you will, to make it more legitimate and to make it sound as if there's a legitimate argument in the opposite direction. There is not. They need to come forward. And I've said this before, I will say it again on this show, as I've said before, they need to come forward and deny the notion under these circumstances that there is a presidential immunity doctrine out there for crimes committed. And oh, by the way, the other troubling part of this, assuming that they come down in some iteration of that, we plainly have at least a couple of Supreme Court justices who may go in the opposite direction, or may say some things that again suggest that indeed the Constitution is not what it says. That is equally troubling. If the Supreme Court does not come forward, whether it's next week or probably more likely in June, and say with unanimity, 9 of them, that there's no such thing as criminal immunity for a president who's committing crimes in the Oval Office as the president, official or private, unless they say that, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And that's the fear that I came out of from this morning's oral argument.
Folks, you're listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show. James Santel, former U.S. Attorney, host of Amicus here on the Civic Media Network. Jim, retired conservative appellate judge Michael Ludig had a comment today, lamenting the fact that they talked around the one question. And I did tune in, and it was hard because I was doing other things, but I wanted to get a sense of how it was and the questions and the tone of it all. And it seems like, my goodness, we're getting in the weeds here. This is we're getting way too far in. And here's what Ludig had to say. The question that was not answered is whether a former president of the United States may be prosecuted for attempting to remain in power, notwithstanding the election of his successor by the American people, thereby also depriving his lawfully elected successor of the powers of the presidency to which that successor became entitled upon his rightful election by the American people, and preventing the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in American history. I mean, I don't get all the hypotheticals. I mean, and some of the questions talking about who's. I mean, this is why we're here. This is the point. Did you get any sense of satisfaction at the end of this thing today, Jim?
I did not, for that very reason. Judge Ludig's got it just right. This should have been, maybe you let counsel for Donald Trump make his presentation, and then you go to Michael Dreeben, who, by the way, is superb in so many ways in responding to these out there questions from the Supreme Court. But what you do is, all right, we've got nothing more to say. Let's not have a 3-hour oral argument on this issue. It is just as narrow as you just indicated, Dom. Judge Ludig's got it just right. That's the issue. And if you've got some other issues down the road about the next president and some other charges, whether they're criminal, civil down the road, we know already that presidents are not civilly immune from prosecution. We've seen that before. Bill Clinton, John Paul Stevens has said this with respect to other presidents. We know that issue is out there. Here, all you need to do is say presidents are not above the law. Judge Ludig's got it just right. And there is nothing to prevent this criminal prosecution on these facts, on these allegations in this grand jury indictment from going forward. Do not try to parse this into something more significant than that. It's interesting. I thought it was a law school class in many ways. I thought it was actually Michael Dreeben, again, who I think is brilliant. tutoring the members of the Supreme Court. They thought they had all sorts of wonderful questions, and he not only had responses, but basically put them in their places when it came to the contest, if you will, about the specifics that they were raising. This was Michael. This was Michael Dreben's class today. He did a wonderful job. It's unfortunate that he had to do this at the length that he did. This should have been done in 15 minutes, and we should have anticipated a decision. Right now, we're going to get something much messier in June.
Jim, with regards to the Justice Amy Coney Barrett getting the Trump attorney to acknowledge the very specific issues, many that she read directly from the prosecutor's filings, that these in fact were, personal acts essentially. I'm not clear on the scope of all of the details of the indictment, but couldn't Jack Smith just drop all the other ones and go with the ones that they already said, yep, that was personal, in the interest of time being of the essence?
Sure, he certainly could. And Amy Coney Barrett, following up on precisely the exchange that you're identifying right now, Dom, said just that. She said, why can't we divide this up? You go ahead, we'll send it back, try those counts or try those aspects, if you will. And this is the other problem with that notion. We've got 4 counts here, and they allege conspiracies, and they also obviously allege under Section 1512 these other issues related to obstruction. And what Michael Dreeben was saying, the problem with that is that all 4 counts kind of pass between, and I hate to even say the distinction here, private and public, official and private. There's no such thing. But Michael Dreeben calls this an integrated conspiracy. And what he is saying is you can't parse these out. It sounds like a good idea. Send them back. Let Judge Chutkan have some hearings about this, and she figures it out. District court judges are not going to take these 4, frankly, very straightforward, direct counts and say, well, I'm going to parse out this language, that language. She can make limitations on the evidence, but that's not the kind of thing you do. And all this question about this mixed case, official and unofficial, personal, it just doesn't reflect what's really going on here. Michael Dreeben was right to say this is an integrated conspiracy. It partakes of things you're doing in your official capacity, things you're doing probably in your private capacity. In the end, those distinctions do not make a difference. And that was his very compelling point.
Well, you make very compelling points. We appreciate you coming around, and we hope you stick around more with our good friend James Santel, former U.S. attorney. He is the host of Amicus, a law review on Saturday mornings right here on the Civic Media Network, 9 to 11. Look it up. Let me make sure I got that right. A law review.
That's correct.
Amicus, a law review. More Jim Santel and the Devil's Advocates.
James?
Yes.
Maggie Dawn called you, since you and Don are coming through the same channel.
Yes.
There seems to be like some slight feedback. So she recommends that when you aren't talking, mute yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
I will do just that. Very
Sounds
good.
All right.
I blame Dom.
Somebody's got to be responsible,
You're
right?
muted. Now I can't hear you. Or maybe he cut you off. Go ahead, finish your thought, Joe.
I was just saying someone has to be held responsible. We don't do that much in America anymore, but somebody should.
Let me ask you, do you mind if I take you off track to bring back this segment? I had a lady, we talked yesterday about the failure to file charges by Janelle Branchin against Branchin.
Right.
And the fact there are at least 4 tapes of her. Now, I actually had some pushback from a DOJ lady, state DOJ, that said she knows this prosecutor and she finds her to be very credible, doesn't think, thinks there's what you can prove and, what you know and what you can prove. And she said these would clearly be inadmissible, these one-sided tapes. One other thought, Jim, we might ask you to stay one more segment if you don't mind. So
happy to be here.
49.
Yeah, my time is your time.
We're
As
trap the
30
audience in their
seconds.
driveways as long as we can.
All right. Everybody's getting turned off.
Devil's Advocates, radio for the 99%.
Thank you for listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show. Our friend and colleague, James Santel, former U.S. Attorney, host of Amicus, a law review, airing here on the Civic Media Network on Saturdays, 9 to 11 a.m. Central. Check it out. Jim, thank you for sticking around.
Good to be with you as always, gentlemen.
Jim, I digress for just a minute because I got called out for something we talked about on the air yesterday. Sue Opper, who is the District Attorney of Waukesha County. And Jim, I know you were a federal prosecutor, but we put forth our opinions yesterday that Opper should have considered charging Janelle Branchin because there are all these existing tapes that could be used as evidence, at least shows intent. We know what she's thinking because we've heard the tapes, or at least the prosecutor has. Jim, this nice lady, I think I'm going to call her Meg. Meg said, we got it absolutely wrong. First and foremost, she commends. She is a retired assistant attorney general, district attorney, pardon me, for the state of Wisconsin. She commends Opper and says, I've known her for 30 years. And she says, effectively, we've got it completely wrong on the whole evidentiary thing. And I want to ask your opinion, counselor. Recorded tapes, one side consents, the other side does not know. Can those be used in a criminal prosecution in the state of Wisconsin, to your opinion, counselor?
Right. And so these issues, again, they loom large. And I won't go down the road of commenting upon the credibility or the history of a particular district attorney because we're focusing upon the particular decision that DA Hopper is making here. And when I look at the letter that she has written, I do not see it as a document that's disingenuous. She plainly is wrestling with these evidentiary concerns about the use of the tapes here. At the same time, my response on this is that you plainly have more than an indication. You probably have probable cause that indeed there's some criminal activity here. And the question that I do not know about, and I should pause sort of right in the middle of this and say, I very seldom second guess prosecutors, not because they're in the scope of my family, if you will, they're not, but just because there may be some things in the file that I do not know about that may not be in the public domain. But that leads me to the point, which is just this. It struck me that Susan Opper's letter was focused exclusively upon these tapes. And I always think about two things. One is, what is the interest of the community? And if there is an interest in the community in addressing what appear to be, again, putting the evidentiary issues to one side, criminal conduct, then the question is there a way to present this in court? Now, Susan Opper has appropriately said, well, wait a minute, we've got this consent issue. A judge would certainly not permit that to go forward. And the question there is giving it a try, if you will, giving a shot and saying, yes, indeed, we understand that there are some of those prohibitions here. There are often exceptions to those kinds of evidentiary rules. All kinds of things can be raised in front of the judge as to those particular tapes, which leads me to the second and larger issue that I responded to. I thought about when I read the letter. Again, I do not attack the letter. I think as far as it goes, it's just fine. But the question is, all right, you've got this reason to believe that there are these conversations. Let's assume they would not come in at trial. Are there other sources of that same information that you can possibly present to a charging official, the DA? Are there other things that you could present that do not rely centrally upon that? I was stricken that the letter focuses so much upon that evidentiary aspect and not addressing the larger issue of a crime having been committed here and whether there's an alternative means of getting it in, and frankly giving up on the notion that there is no way that a judge would ever permit any of these into evidence. I recognize what Wisconsin says about those kinds of things. Many times in my career, attempts to try to do justice by asking the judge, finding a legitimate, credible theory to move things in, to get things in under an evidence code. Again, I will add quickly, I do not know all the ins and outs of the case, but it strikes me that there are some things that were missing from that letter.
Okay. From my new friend Meg's email to me, and I want to make sure we address this because we don't want to get it wrong. She writes, like all prosecutors, charging a case is based solely on the facts and your ability to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. You are dead wrong about what the role of a prosecutor is. It is not to bring cases in which you know in advance that a key piece of evidence will not be allowed at trial, and any evidence that comes from that piece of evidence could be excluded based on the fruit of the poison tree rule of evidence. Does the prosecutor have to have a guaranteed ironclad case each and every time? Because I feel like that's the way perhaps our attorney general is thinking with these fake electors.
Right.
You know, that's what an indictment's for. That's what the grand jury is to decide. Am I totally wrong on this, Jim?
No, and again, what you just read, I would embrace that to some extent. That is, yes, indeed. If you know that the whole core of your case, virtually everything, 98% of it, is not going to be admitted into the record and under the evidence code, then you've got a problem. But once again, the issue is, are there other mechanisms perhaps that are out there that you may be able to pursue? And your purpose in the end is to do justice. And under these circumstances, it strikes me that you can do both of those things, that you can abide by the evidence code, but also explore those opportunities. I find the letter, as I say, too narrow in terms of its approach. And many times in my career, other circumstances, I can remember cases where, you know what, we're not sure if the evidence is going to come in, but we know something terrible, something criminal happened here, and we're willing to go into a courtroom and make a credible, not a frivolous, but a credible argument to a judge about why this particular bit of evidence should be admitted. And that happens all the time. And that's the discretion that prosecutors have. And that's what I think is missing from the otherwise fairly good and direct comment from your listener there.
Well, some of the other prosecutors around the state said, we're personally conflicted because we're members of the Republican parties that are alleged to have been part of this conspiracy. Jim, ultimately, the Wisconsin Ethics Commission said 60 days for local prosecutors, then we'll move on up the ladder, perhaps the State Department of Justice. That means Josh Call. He has not moved with alacrity on the fake electors issue. Would Josh give us any indication if he was moving forward, or would it just be, silence because you don't comment on an open investigation?
And again, on that issue, on the fake electors issue, I'll offer just this additional insight, which is, yes, there's a standard approach on Department of Justice. You don't comment on pending investigations, except when there's a public interest in knowing about them. And that's why the fake electors, he can, in fact, confirm or deny. He doesn't have to tell us all the details, whether there's investigation going on. As to this matter, again, public interest could also do that.
Inquiring minds want to know. Come back. More James Santel, more Devil's Advocates, a happier happy hour indeed.
Hey, Dom.
Yo.
When, I don't know, we're having some slap back and feedback. When James is speaking and you aren't, mute yourself.
Okay.
I don't know. It's something Maggie called up. She suggested that for James. It was still there in the last segment ever so slightly. So that might be another way to eliminate that.
Sure.
Okay. That's it. Hey, James. Maybe back off on your mic input. Just drop it just a hair.
Sure.
Okay. All right. All right. Stand by.
Standing by.
Think you know politics? Think again. Welcome to the Devil's Advocates.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show, a Thursday show for the ages. Rolling through a happy hour. We got a fine guest. He's stuck around. He is James Santel, former U.S. attorney. He's the host of Amicus, a law review Saturday mornings on the Civic Media Network, 9 to 11. Apparently, Dom wants to jump in here. So
jump in. Yeah. Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I do want to
segments, man.
I do want to get back to the national news, certainly, but I want to kind of put a bow on some of the questions I had regarding this effort here in Wisconsin by State Representative Janelle Branch and other Republicans to circumvent state finance campaign limitations by pooling money to county parties and then purposely distributing them to the candidate of their choice. And in this regard, this is regarding, of course, multiple 34 recordings, I understand, of which 4 were directly between the candidate Steen and current legislator Janelle Branch. The recording rules, Jim, one person, 2 people, 3 different options. Both people know that they're being recorded. One of the 2 people know they're being recorded, or nobody knows they're being recorded. What circumstances, how would that impact a criminal and or federal case?
Sure.
I'm sorry, criminal and or civil case, Jim.
Sure. And so again, as you indicated, every state is different when it comes to these consent rules, right? And plainly, the Wisconsin rule would have an impact. That's where you'd start. In the state prosecution, even in federal prosecution, defense counsel can come forward and say, under the state law, these tapes cannot come in, which again is the position of the district attorney here. And so you would argue about that plainly. And again, I do not mean to indicate those are not insignificant arguments. They are. But to the initial point of your question, even, as you describe the events themselves, the alleged activity, it strikes me, and this is putting a little bit more flesh on the bones of what we were chatting about before, that if the recordings themselves give you probable cause to open a file, to believe, even if they are not admissible, what other things are out there that you could also use to identify whether this is true or not? Are there other witnesses who may not be on tapes that may not be admissible? As you just described what you're saying here, Dom, what about, are there written records? Are there written notes? We're right now, there's a fellow who's testifying in a Manhattan courtroom about his contemporaneous notes that he's writing on a regular basis about conversations that are being had. What about financial transactions? If indeed any of this is related to money, are there bank statements? Are there checks? Are there other things? Are there ledgers? All those kinds of things that you can identify. And if in the end you find that that is not sufficient, even if you conclude that you can't get the tapes in, then you say, you know what, I don't have enough to go forward here. But it just strikes me that the letter itself was too narrow for my taste and did not in fact say, oh, by the way, or at least say, we've got these, we are investigating other options here. And for that reason, we're going to come back to you at some point. We're not going to tell you all the things we're doing as investigators and prosecutors, but we are going to explore this more. If in the end there is really no viable presentation that we can make that will survive motions to dismiss, motions to suppress, we'll let you know that. But just on the tapes alone, it strikes me that that is a little bit, that's too limiting, at least from my perspective, in the federal system.
Folks, you're listening to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. Fine guest, James Santel, former U.S. attorney, friend of ours, host of Amicus, a law review Saturday mornings on the Civic Media Network, 9 to 11 a.m. Tune in. I often do at the cabin, Jim. I'm glad I get to take us to the New York courtroom. You helped me transition nicely, Counselor. David Pecker, the prosecutors, the DA, leading with the former head of AMI, the mothership of the National Enquirer. And Jim, Pecker, from my understanding, from the reporting, because I'm not inside the courtroom, obviously, but he basically laid out in testimony today that these payoffs, not just to Stormy Daniels, but a payoff to a former playmate, Karen McDougal, a payoff to the doorman at Trump Tower, and $180,000 later, Trump stiffed them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the conversation came up about paying off Stormy Daniels. But the unfortunately named David Pecker, Jim, he said this was about elections. Don't you think this is pretty damning stuff? It's a good lead witness, I think, from the prosecution.
Absolutely. A couple of very good things to unpack there. Number one, the prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, and the folks who were there on his behalf in the courtroom identified this fellow. He is not a convicted criminal. Yes, a National Enquirer. We know all the baggage that may come with that. But nonetheless, this is a guy who not only can provide the interstitial relationships here, describe the history. I think it is fascinating, something that I did not know until his testimony these days, and even the opening statement, that it was Donald Trump's own failures, as he always did, to pay his bills that prompted Pecker to say, you know what, I'm not going to front this money anymore. I'm not going to do this for Stormy Daniels. I did it before. I wasn't paid. And then Donald Trump again engages with Michael Flynn and makes this happen. I found that fascinating. The other piece of this that I also find fascinating, as I was just indicating in response to my conversation with Dom, this is a man who's also writing notes at the same time that all this is happening and describing not only what is the history of this, but the transactions back and forth. Why is that also compelling? Well, the contemporaneous notes, these are not notes put together last week during the course of trial preparation. They're things that are committed to paper at the time that they're happening. They corroborate what Pecker is saying, as do the other financial records. Again, I think this is, I hesitate to say it's brilliant. Maybe with a small b, it's brilliant to begin with him because he provides the overall view of this. And he's not the kind of person that the jury is automatically going to dismiss as being incredible. We're probably going to see some of that when it comes to Michael Cohen. He will be sandwiched in the middle of this trial, and then we'll get more at the very end to kind of soften the blow, if you will, of Michael Cohen's baggage. But this is a strong start. And if anyone's watching this carefully, this is the kind of structure that you want to put in place for a jury. They already have the broad, not just the broad ambits of this, they've got the particulars as well. David Pecker was a very, and is a very compelling witness on behalf of this prosecution.
Jim Sentel served the side story going on concurrently in this trial, the gag order, and the repeated apparent violations of the gag order. Before court today, it was alleged the former president broke the gag order 4 more times just over the last 3 days. Jim, at some point, the dam's going to break, and it's going to have to be worse than $1,000 a crack, because that's not going to be dissuasive to this guy. I mean, hell, he lost $5 million to E. Jean Carroll, and he ran out and he did it at least 2 more times. So, Jim, here's my question. Do you put the guy's ass in jail in a holding cell, at least during the course of the day, so he can't be truthy socialing at the judge's daughter or whoever else, the witnesses, during every break in the action?
This is exactly, Mike, what we chatted about last Saturday on.
Oh, no. We'll assume Jim will pay the cable bill and be back in just a second. But isn't this interesting?
So I'll review.
I'm sorry, Jim. We lost you there for a moment. I know you talked about it on your own show because I was tuned in from the cabin.
Right.
But tell the audience that missed the big show last week.
Sure. And apologize again for the technology glitch here on my end. This is all about deterrence. You want to stop this person, in this case, Donald Trump, any defendant, from behaving in a way that's contrary to the rules and the standards and the practices that apply to every other defendant in any other case, state or federal. And what you've done is you've told him what he can and cannot do. He continues to violate it. You do engage probably in some gradual discipline here. So yes, probably Judge Mershon is going to fine him a little bit, but fairly quickly, as I've advocated before, and I will do it again with you today, the possibility and the prospect, the likelihood of detention has got to be on the table. And can you do that? Absolutely, you can do it. At the end of every proceeding at 5:30, 6 o'clock, the local law enforcement, outside of the presence of the jury, takes the defendant to a previously identified spot, and you are detained overnight, not in a hotel room, but in a detention facility somewhere. You have access, yes, to your lawyers, to your family. You can get clothing. They'll feed you, all those kinds of things. You do not have your phone, and that, again, would be true of any defendant. And then the following morning, you can get up and shower and shave, and you can come to court again. The jury will know nothing about this, but every single time you do it, again, we're now approaching, we're certainly in the teens now. Every single time you do it, you get a night in detention. And that should be what Judge Mershon is going to do. That's huge news, I know, again, in the history of America. We've never done that before. But absent doing that, just the opposite will happen. If there are only fines that are imposed and nothing happens at all, what this could very well do is simply encourage more of it. And then we've got the paper tiger problem, right? The judge is telling me not to do this, but he, in the end, does nothing about it. You have to have the detention option not only available, but it's time to do it now. This is not a successful outing just in imposing fines.
James Santel, former U.S. attorney, 4 minutes left in this segment, Jim. The testimony from David Pecker I thought was interesting in a couple of regards. One, he lays out the defense, defending Donald Trump, the catch and kill, right? That's, we're going to get these stories. We're going to pay them to keep their mouths shut. Okay, fine. No big deal. But they also engaged in offense, in my opinion. They were running, intentionally defamatory stories, for instance, about Ted Cruz and his father and, the murder of JFK. From what kind of liability should someone like David Pecker or the National Enquirer, when they put out, as they admitted to in court today, obviously phony, false, fake news stories, ironically, hypocritically, as Donald Trump claims to be about the rest of the media, participating in these fake news stories, specifically intentionally defaming his political opponents. Is there liability there in your mind, sir?
Sure. Certainly with respect to the journalism piece, and I say that advisedly, this is New York Times versus Sullivan, right? And we've seen in the Dominion case, other situations recently where you can overcome this very high standard for getting back at journalists and newspapers, media outlets who are doing this kind of thing. If there is a false statement knowingly done, again, with the intent there as well, it sure sounds as if you've got all the predicates for defamation. E. Jean Carroll knows that as well. And again, maybe difficult to wrap in Donald Trump civilly, but to the extent that there is a conspiracy to do just that, certainly David Pecker and the National Enquirer may well be, if they are not already, on the receiving end of that kind of attack. Again, we're seeing more and more that the New York Times Sullivan standards can be met and are being met in situations where we've got reckless and knowingly, purposefully wrong statements intended for the purpose of damaging and harming.
Jim Santel, that brings me to Wisconsin Elections Commissioner Administrator Megan Wolf, who has been targeted by Donald Trump by, I would perceive, many defamatory comments. She has been put personally at risk, hence the governor's efforts to secure her family and her safety. Jim, what do you think about her? I know she's something of a public figure, I would say on a low scale, but does she have a legitimate case? Should she be seeking legal counsel and suing his ass for defamation?
Right, and a minimum should be talking to an attorney, right, about what the rights are out there. To the extent, again, there are statements made about her that are knowingly and purposefully intended to harm in the public domain, knowing that they're false and they're untrue, and having that consequence of harm. That's the E. Jean Carroll situation again. That could also be the predicate for that kind of litigation. It all depends upon the specific facts. And again, we're always thoughtful about balancing that. She is a public figure and is also in the public domain. Some of this comes with the territory, but I would offer not this kind of thing, and certainly not the threats an awful lot of public officials of physical harm and even worse are receiving these days. That's not a part of American tradition.
Last 30 seconds, Counselor. Trump seems diminished to me in his trial. Your thoughts, quickly.
Absolutely. Again, even reporters who are there say that he seems not the aggressive person certainly that you see on the weekend stages at various states around the nation. This has got, when you're sitting there and listening to it day after day, it's got to have an impact upon you. Absolutely.
Jim Santel, Trump coming to Waukesha. Next break, next Wednesday. We'll be there. Tune in for Amicus, a law review, Saturday mornings. Thanks, Jim.
Always a pleasure, gentlemen. Good to see you.
Jim.
Are you honest and hardworking? Do you love to improve people's lives by improving their homes? Chad's Design Build offers excellent compensation and benefits.
Thanks, Rich.
Outstanding customer service, professional design, construction management, and craftsmanship, all in a nurturing, positive workplace. Whether you're thinking about remodeling your home or considering joining our team, go to chadsdesignbuild.com to learn more.
It is one of the most important business decisions you will make, selling your commercial building. It should involve making a plan to maximize your sale price through effective and responsive marketing. Your plan should also include a clear understanding of tax consequences. You need the professionals at Altus Commercial Real Estate to guide your success. Experience and responsive professionals make all the difference. Make your plan to sell. Call Altus Commercial Real Estate today at 608-338-1101.
Hey, Brad from Zero Res Madison here. What's the best way to clean your carpet? Not surprisingly, it's the same way you clean your clothes. You wouldn't clean a dirty shirt by running a white cloth over the top of it, nor would you try to get it clean by sprinkling chemicals and rubbing it in. For a real clean, you need hot water, agitation, and a cleaning agent, just like your lawn. For a fresh, healthy clean with no residue, call Zero Res Madison or schedule online. Zero Res, spell it forward or backward, it's the right way to clean.
DevilRadioswag.com. You've asked for it for over a decade. We've finally gotten off our dead and responded. DevilRadioswag.com. T-shirt in Dom's favorite slimming black, white, or gray. DevilRadioswag.com. Crew necks, hoodies, coffee mugs, exclusive merchandise of the greatest radio show ever. Only at the DevilRadioswag.com. Because we got bills too. You're listening.
The Devil's Advocates. So relevant, they have 1 foot in tomorrow.
And thank you for listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show, our last segment of the day. If you have something to say, hit us on the lines right now at 844-967-2789.
Dominic, always appreciate when the very smart and astute Jim Santel comes around. You can hear Amicus, a law review, each Saturday morning, 9 to 11. And I could just envision people all around the great state of Wisconsin falling out of their cars in their driveways. They've been staying there, they've been home for 20 minutes, but they're not going in the house, not while Jim's on. I did that earlier today. I'll give a little credit to the Brewers. I was not going to leave my car while the Brewers were still in that battle, and they did win today. So go Brewers, go Jim Santel, and go audience. Listen to Jim Saturday mornings, but I suspect there are a few less people now. They're running in the house to desperately start dinner. 844-967-2789. Dom, during the Supreme Court oral arguments today, a question about a coup. What if the president ordered a coup? And I'm not sure that was a hypothetical, but anyways.
No. Of all the hypotheticals they discussed today, that was not one of them.
I want to talk about Mark Esper, Trump's former defense secretary. Sarah K. Burris reporting Trump's defense secretary describes when he rejected then president's unlawful order. It's not a hypothetical. It's already happened. Donald Trump's former defense secretary, Mark Esper, rejects the idea of absolute immunity for a president, which was the argument before the Supreme Court today. But it certainly wasn't the first time he's broken with Trump. Speaking to CNN's Jake Tapper, Esper said he hates it when examples are brought up, such as the president ordering the military to stage a coup, because he describes it as too outlandish. Trump's lawyer argues that if he ordered the military to stage a coup, it would be considered an official act. That's what Sauer said.
That's literally their position, yes.
It would be an official act and therefore completely immune from prosecution. Tapper agreed, saying that the concept addressed didn't seem all that hypothetical. Yeah, that's my point, Jake. In a Friends of the Court brief, a group of former military officials said any military officers who knowingly issued or carried out such an unlawful order would themselves be criminally liable. And today at the U.S. Supreme Court, they talked about everybody below the president, no immunity. Everybody else has a standard of law they have to live by. But the arguments being made is that guy, that sole guy, lawless, whatever he wants to do.
So what? And I don't understand this. I heard Alito saying, well, the SEAL Team 6 example, well, the SEAL Team 6, they're honorable. They work under the whatever code. I'm thinking, well, this is the commander-in-chief. They give the order. If the commander-in-chief gives the order and people follow through with it, he is not liable, but they are.
Well, Mark Esper gave a specific example. On January 20th, 2020 or so, President Trump made a statement that the United States will attack Iran's historical and cultural sites. And Esper says, I went on TV and said, no, we will not do that. We're going to follow the laws of land warfare. And I felt it important at the time to make a statement that not just the American public, but really to the United States military, our professional armed forces, that we will continue to follow the laws of land warfare and honor the obligations and legal obligations of our profession. It was less than a year later that Esper was fired via tweet by Trump for contradicting him. Pleased to announce that Christopher Miller, the highly respected director of National Counterterrorism Center, unanimously confirmed by the Senate, will be acting Secretary of Defense effective immediately. Chris will do a great job. Mark Esper has been terminated. I'd like to thank him for his service.
And when was that? They have a date on there? My understanding, that was right before January 6th, man. They put in the civilian Chris Miller. I mean, he was the guy that put out the memo about how, the police and National Guard should interact with the Trump supporters. That guy? I mean, that was done specifically in furtherance of the coup, man. This is the point. These things are all, they're not all separate individual universal things. These are all part of the same story.
Yes, probably.
Yeah, probably.
What else did I have? What else did I see today? There was one other big issue. I'm looking for it again. Dom, you got any final thoughts for the day?
I do, specifically on this. The Kagan, Justice Elena Kagan versus Trump's attorney, talking about the president, could not be charged unless he was first impeached, right? And she goes to the coup. All right, let's assume the president's gone, she says. Let's say the president who ordered the military to stage a coup, he's no longer the president. He wasn't impeached. He couldn't be impeached, but he ordered the military to stage a coup. You're saying that's an official act. The question was met with silence from Trump's normally fast-talking lawyer. That's immune, Kagan pressed? I would think it would depend on the circumstances, whether it's an official act. Sauer said cautiously. If it were an official act, again, he would have to be impeached. What does it mean, depend on the circumstances? Kagan asked. He's a commander-in-chief. He talks to generals all the time. He told the generals, I don't feel like leaving office. I want to stage a coup. Is that immune? Sauer argued that there's a very low risk of a president staging a coup. If it's an official act, is it an official act? Kagan asked again. If it's an official act, it's impeachment, Sauer stated. Is it an official act? Kagan demanded. On the way you've described that hypothetical, it could well be. I just don't know.
Dom, I remember what my final thought for the day was. Contrary to everyone else in Trump's orbit, Trump left the courtroom today and had nothing but great things to say about the witness, David Packer. And it makes you wonder, What's the National Enquirer still got in the vault about this guy? Because I've never seen that attitude.
No,
Thank
he's
you.
very, very nice to him. Very nice to the judge down in Florida. Wonder why those things are.
Thank you to our fine guest, former U.S. Attorney James Santel. Tune in Saturday mornings, Amicus, a law review. Tomorrow, William Walter joins me on the big show. Dom, you're going to be here. It's Friday, right?
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Rich.